Proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or on which the vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Record votes on postponed questions will be taken later. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 697 as amended.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 99, H.R. 697, a bill to provide for the conveyance of certain federal land in Clark County, Nevada, for the environmental remediation and reclamation of the Three Kids Mine project site and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials into the bill under consideration.
Without objection, so
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, H.R. 697, the Three Kids Mine Remediation and Reclamation Act, was introduced by our congressman from our colleague from Nevada, Mr. Heck, on Valentine's Day, and it was marked up on June 12th of this year. The Three Kids Mine is located in Clark County, Nevada, adjacent to the city of Henderson. The mine was operated from 1916 to 1961. The United States, through the Defense Plant Corporation, owned 446 acres of the Three Kids Mine project from 1942 to 1955. The mine site was used to produce federally owned manganese ore for national defense purposes and was leased by the U.S. until 2003 to stockpile manganese nodules. The Three Kids Mine project is approximately 1,262 acres and includes 948 acres of federal lands managed by the Bureau of Land Management and the Bureau of Reclamation, and 314 acres of private lands where the mill site and processing plant is located. The site is contaminated with arsenic, lead, and other heavy metals, and petroleum hydrocarbons. Cost estimates for cleanup and reclamation of the site range from $300 million to $1.2 billion. The City of Henderson, the Henderson Redevelopment Agency, the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection, Lakemore Development, and the Bureau of Land Management have negotiated a plan to clean up and redevelop the Three Kids Mine project site. That includes the purchase of 948 acres of federal land. The purchase price would be adjusted to reflect the actual cleanup costs of the federal and non-federal lands where the federal government has environmental liability resulting from the mill, from the processing facilities, and the storage of federal-owned manganese nodules. All in all, Mr. Speaker, this is a win-win for everyone involved. The environmental problems are addressed, the abandoned mine site is reclaimed, and the land redeveloped for beneficial use, all at no cost to the American taxpayer. If successful, this could provide a framework for other abandoned mine sites that are near or adjacent to small towns and larger urban areas. So I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. It passed by a voice vote in the last Congress, and I would hope it would do so again in this Congress. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of time. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, we agree. The Three Kids Mine is an abandoned manganese mine and mill site located in Henderson, Nevada, and this bill designates a combined 314 acres of private land and 948 acres of public land as the 1,262-acre Three Kids Mine project site, and it provides for the conveyance of the public lands to the Henderson Redevelopment Agency. The bill requires that standard appraisal practices be used to determine fair market value for the federal lands to be conveyed, and once that determination has been made, the bill would require the Secretary of Interior to determine the reasonable approximate estimation of the costs to assess, remediate, and reclaim the Three Kids Mine project site. That cost would then be deducted from the fair market value of the public land that is conveyed. The Henderson Redevelopment Agency would pay the adjusted fair market value of the conveyed land if any, and the federal government would be released from any and all liabilities or claims. The BLM supports innovative proposals to address the cleanup of the Three Kids mine, and we do not oppose this bill. I reserve the balance of my time.
This gentleman, gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Washington State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am very pleased to yield 4 minutes to the author of this legislation, who introduced it in the last Congress and in this Congress, the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Heck.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 697, the Three Kids Mine Remediation and Reclamation Act, which is an innovative solution for restoring our environment, improving safety, and creating jobs. H.R. 697 addresses the safety and environmental concerns of the Three Kids Mine, as was stated, an abandoned manganese mine and mill site consisting of approximately 1,262 acres of both federal and private lands, which lie within the Henderson city limits, and is located across from a busy parkway and an increasing number of homes and businesses. The site was owned and operated by various parties, including the United States government, from approximately 1917 through 1961, and used as a storage area for federal manganese ore reserves from the late 1950s through 2003. Currently, the project site contains numerous large, unstable, sheer cliff open pits as deep as 400 feet, huge volumes of mine overburden and tailings, mill facility remnants, and waste disposal areas. To give a sense of scale, the site contains mine overburden mounds that are approximately 10 stories high in some areas, and abandoned waste ponds that are up to 60 feet deep and filled with more than 1 million cubic yards of gelatinous tailings containing high concentrations of arsenic, lead, and petroleum compounds. H.R. 697 provides an innovative public-private partnership solution to finally clean up the abandoned Three Kids mine site. In its simplest form, H.R. 697 directs the Secretary of the Interior to convey the federal lands at the project site, approximately 948 acres, at fair market value, taking into account the cost of investigating and remediating the entire site, which also includes an additional 314 acres of now private lands that were used historically in mine operations. In return for conveying the land at fair market value, the federal government will also receive a release of liability for cleanup of both the federal and private lands. Under this legislation, before the federal lands are conveyed, the state must enter into a binding consent agreement under which the cleanup of the entire project site will occur. This agreement must include financial assurances to ensure the completion of the remediation and reclamation of the site. The cleanup will be financed with private capital and Nevada tax increment financing at no cost to the federal government. Again, this project will be carried out at no cost to the federal government. H.R. 697 is the result of more than 5 years of work among the City of Henderson Redevelopment Agency, the Department of the Interior, the State of Nevada, and private entities. This public-private partnership solution will finally lead to the cleanup and reclamation of the Three Kids mine site, while at the same time providing for economic development and the creation of as many 3,000 jobs. Furthermore, I believe this innovative solution could serve as a viable model for the cleanup and reclamation of other similar sites across the country. This bill, which has the support of the entire Nevada delegation, is nearly identical to H.R. 2512, which passed the House of Representatives by voice vote during the 112th Congress, but unfortunately did not receive consideration in the Senate prior to the adjournment of the last Congress. I want to thank the Chairman and the Ranking Member of the House Natural Resources Committee for recognizing the importance of this legislation to Nevada and the West, and for their efforts in advancing it in a bipartisan fashion through committee. H.R. 697 is a win for the economy, a win for the environment, and a win for the federal taxpayer. I encourage my colleagues to join me in supporting this legislation and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from California.
I yield as much time as she may consume to the gentlelady from Nevada, Representative Titus.
The gentlelady from Nevada is recognized.
Thank you, and I thank my friend from California for the time. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 697, the Three Kids Mine Remediation and Reclamation Act, and urge my colleagues to support the bill. This bipartisan legislation, which has the support of the entire Nevada delegation, including Senators Reed and Heller, is critical to the cleanup and revitalization of long-dormant land near Henderson, Nevada. H.R. 697 sets up a public-private partnership to address the remediation of more than 1,200 acres of former manganese mining and industrial lands for redevelopment. These activities, as you have heard, date back nearly a century and were critical to our national defense during World War II. But over the last 50 years, the already nasty, polluted site has become increasingly dangerous. Accordingly, the cleanup of this land is a top priority for the Nevada State Department of Environmental Protection, the City of Henderson, and for the thousands of southern Nevada residents who live nearby. I support this legislation to clean up the Three Kids mine for both safety and environmental reasons and to create opportunities for redevelopment of the site for beneficial use and economic potential. So I would urge my colleagues to join me and the Nevada delegation in support of this bill, and I yield back my time.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Washington.
I would ask my friend from California. I have no more requests for time, and I'm prepared to yield back if the gentleman is prepared to yield back.
I would tell the chairman I have no further speakers and am prepared to yield back if the chairman is prepared to close.
Yeah, I'm prepared to close. I mean,
I yield back my time.
The gentleman from California yields back his time. The gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As was mentioned, this is a win-win proposition, no cost to the taxpayer, cleaning up this mine, and I urge its support. It passed again by a voice vote in the last Congress, and I hope it does so again in this Congress. And with that, I urge my colleagues to vote yes and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 697 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1411 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1411, a bill to include the Point Arena Stornetta public lands in the California Coastal National Monument as a part of the National Landscape Conservation System and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 1411 would add 1,255 acres to the Point Arena Stornetta public lands to the California Coastal National Monument, which was created by Presidential Proclamation 7264 on January 2000. The Stornetta family, the namesake of this area being annexed into this monument, grazes cattle in this area, so it is imperative that grazing continues and is compatible with the long-term protection and management of the monument. Public land grazers in Arizona, Montana, and Utah have already been targeted by a few anti-grazing zealots who want to litigate to extinction the legitimate and long-standing practice of grazing on national monuments. During the committee consideration of H.R. 1411, an amendment was adopted to ensure that traditional economic activities and uses, such as grazing, will be allowed to continue once the Point Arena Stornetta public lands are added to the California Coastal National Monument. It also limited future land acquisitions to only those done by donations or exchange, thereby preventing any unnecessary taxpayer expense. Private property rights were also included by ensuring motorized vehicles access to any non-federal lands within the monument and requiring written consent from the landowners before their property can be included in the monument. The bill includes provisions preventing restrictions on military or commercial low-level overflies and training activities, and also on the Department of Homeland Security law enforcement activities. Other routine provisions protecting activities outside of the designation and the prohibiting of recreation buffer zones. I think these conditions are the right conditions when you take land for other uses, and I support this legislation, and with that I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection,
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I am honored to rise in support of my first piece of legislation as a member of Congress, H.R. 1411. This bill will add Mendocino's Point Arena-Stornetta public lands to the California Coastal National Monument. Those of my colleagues who have visited the Mendocino coast appreciate the true, unspoiled beauty of this region, and they understand why it's so important that we protect it for future generations. This bill will preserve a complex and fragile ecosystem on the Mendocino coast, approximately 130 miles north of San Francisco, and it will serve as the first land-based addition to the California Coastal National Monument. It will also add 10 miles of connectivity to the California Coastal Trail. The Point Arena-Stornetta public lands encompass 1,255 acres of pristine coastal wetlands. It includes habitat for several endangered species. The bill will also protect the Garcia River estuary and 2 miles of the Garcia River itself. This river is critical habitat for coho salmon and steelhead trout. And in addition, we will maintain the existing ranching, recreation, and research uses of this land, preserving much of it as a sustainable working landscape. But safeguarding this national treasure isn't just good for the environment, it's also good for the economy. Environmental tourism is critical to the economy of the north coast of California, and expanding the Coastal National Monument will bring new visitors and new economic activity. Tourism is already the #1 source of jobs on the Mendocino coast. We get close to 2 million annual visitors in the region, and that supports more than 5,000 jobs and generates more than $110 million in economic activity annually. The Point Arena-Stornetta public lands are a perfect gateway for visitors to experience the California Coastal National Monument, and that's one of the reasons why the effort to protect this amazing stretch of the Mendocino coast has such broad public support, from state and local elected officials to the Manchester Point Arena Band of Pomo Indians, conservation groups across the country, and business and civic leaders in the community. In addition, hundreds of individuals in this rural area have expressed their support by way of petition. My friend and predecessor in representing the North Coast in Congress, Congressman Mike Thompson, initiated the effort to protect this area in the last Congress, and I am very pleased that he is joining me as a co-sponsor of this bill. I'm also very appreciative of the support of the Chairman of the Natural Resources Committee, Chairman Doc Hastings, and also of the newest member of the Senate and our former ranking member, Democrat Ed Markey. In addition, I want to thank Chairman Bishop and Ranking Member Grijalva of the Public Lands Subcommittee for not only hearing the bill, but for inviting my constituent, Scott Schneider, who's President and CEO of the Mendocino Tourism Bureau, Visit Mendocino, to come and testify in support of this legislation. This bill was reported by the Natural Resources Committee by unanimous consent, and I'm grateful that we've come so far to preserve this iconic landscape. I look forward to continuing to work with the committee, with Senators Boxer and Feinstein, and with my colleagues to ensure that we fully and permanently protect this magnificent coastline. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on H.R. 1411, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I have no more requests for time. If the gentleman is prepared to yield back, I'm prepared to yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I would yield as...
The gentleman from Washington reserves his time. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield as much time as he may consume to the gentleman from Northern Mariana Islands, Mr. Sablon.
The gentleman from Northern Mariana Islands is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding time. Mr. Speaker, from his days in the California State House and now here in Congress, Congressman Jared Huffman has been a leader in protecting our valuable natural resources. H.R. 1411 is a fine example of this commitment and of his leadership. Congressman Huffman's bill incorporates the area known as the Point Arena-Stornetta public lands into the California Coastal National Monument. The bill gives permanent protection to 1,255 acres of wetlands along the Mendocino County coast. The area provides habitat for endangered species, including the Point Arena mountain beaver and the Berrien silver-spot butterfly. And the Garcia River running through it shelters steelhead and silver and king salmon. While I have the floor, I also want to commend Congressman Huffman for his efforts to protect sharks. In the California legislature, Congressman Huffman wrote the law banning the wasteful trade in shark fins. And here in Congress, he led the effort to protest when the Commerce Department proposed regulations preempting state laws against shark finning. The Northern Mariana Islands, which I represent, has enacted a similar law. So along with other members who respect state authority, I co-signed Congressman Hoffman's letter asking NOAA to withdraw its proposed regulation. Again, I commend Mr. Hoffman for his dedication to protecting our natural resources, and I ask all my colleagues to support H.R. 1411. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Reserve my time.
The gentleman from Washington reserves his time. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I thank the gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands, and Mr. Speaker, I would yield as much time as he may consume to my colleague, the gentleman from Monterey, California, Mr. Farr.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Huffman, for yielding. And I want to congratulate the committee and Chairman Doc Hastings on bringing this bill to the floor. I was instrumental in creating the National Coastal Monument along the California coastline, and it had to be done by executive order because we couldn't get the bills out of committee. And I just really appreciate the fact that the committee is concentrating on this, because a lot of these things that people kind of argue against don't realize what the positive unintended consequences are. And what this bill does is it really talks about management of land. And as the chairman pointed out, the substance of the bill allows the private enterprise, the agriculture, to continue and to have it in a way that's going to be cost-effective management. This is a win-win for the private sector and for the public sector. In many cases, the Bureau of Land Management is a very effective land manager. It essentially is, in the West, has a lot of the land that actually was never picked up by Forest Service. When you think of Forest Service, you think of timbering or mining and those kinds of things, or land that qualified for the National Park System. It was kind of the leftover lands of the westward expansion. And they have a lot of land management responsibility and know-how. And California coastline is the #1 attraction and the #1 engine. It's the engine of California. Is really most of the cities and stuff are all along the coast. So anytime you add to ability to expand access, and we sometimes forget in Congress that the #1 activity of interest in this country is watchable wildlife. More people watch wildlife, whether it's in the movies or channels or buy gear to go out, than watch all the national sports. It's huge business, and it's jobs. And in the rural area, this is key to job development. And since we've created the National Coastal Monument, we've had little towns and counties in the rural area that have been identifying the rocks, all of whom have historical names from families or shipwrecks and things that on. And now it gives some attraction to it, some historical attraction, which people love to learn about. It's been a great educational tool to teach us about this 1,100-mile coastline of California, sort of inch by inch. And this addition is just going to be able to build more opportunity for job creation as people want to hire people to give them access, want to buy pictures, want to buy books, want to buy art that's made from it. And so I really commend the committee on realizing that these things are responsible job development jobs, not just government ownership of land. And, you know, when you say, well, it's taking it off the private tax rolls, remember there was a private interest that wanted to give it to and sell it to the national, to a public system. And those lands will pay taxes in lieu of property taxes, PILT taxes. It will continue the economy of the area. But for the local areas, this is pretty rural California, really rural, this will just be a huge economic boon to them. So I compliment Mr. Huffman. This is the first bill he's brought to the floor. Hope he brings very more. He's a very able member of Congress and proved a great member of the California State Legislature. And Mr. Hastings, thank you for providing the leadership to get these bills to the floor so that we could have an opportunity to vote on them. Thank you very much, and urge an aye vote.
I thank the gentleman and would yield the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields the balance of his time, yields back his time. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this is a good piece of legislation, and I urge my colleagues to adopt it. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Washington yields back his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1411 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 2353.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar number 117, H.R. 2353, a bill to amend Title 23, United States Code, with respect to the operation of vehicles on certain Wisconsin highways and for other purposes.
Does the gentleman intend to call up the bill as amended?
Yes.
The bill as amended is pending. Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Petri, and the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. Rahal, will each control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the bill before us.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Speaker, U.S. Highway 41 between Milwaukee and Green Bay is slated to become part of the U.S. interstate system early next year. H.R. 2353 would simply allow trucks that exceed federal weight limits but are currently authorized to operate on this road to continue to operate after the interstate designation. This primarily involves agricultural crops during harvest season, milk, timber, scrap metal, and garbage. No new trucks in excess of federal weight limits would be allowed on the new I-41. This would just maintain the status quo and not disrupt the current flow of traffic. This is not unprecedented, as other roads which have become part of the interstate system have received this type of grandfathering, including I-39 in Wisconsin, with no ill effect. In fact, the Wisconsin State Patrol, which is responsible for truck safety enforcement, has issued a statement in support of this bill and is noting the safety benefits of not forcing these trucks off the safer interstate and onto state and local roads which are not designated to carry such traffic. The bill before us also is supported by Republican and Democratic members of the Wisconsin House delegation, our 2 U.S. senators, the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, and many other state and local officials and organizations. To ask my House colleagues to approve this bill, which is so important to my state, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Okay.
The gentleman wishes to clarify with the Chair wishes to clarify with the gentleman whether the bill called up is with or without an amendment.
It's without amendment. Why would they ask? They never asked. What?
The pending bill is the Union Calendar version, which has not been amended.
Oh.
The gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume. Congress has previously grandfathered truck weights on roads that obtained interstate designation, including Interstate 99 in Pennsylvania, Interstate 39 in Wisconsin, and Interstate 68 in Maryland. I point that out to note that what is being proposed in the pending legislation is not without precedent or justification. While I support this legislation, consideration by the House of this bill should not be construed as an indicator of movement on the broader debate of whether to increase truck weights generally. This is a limited extension of current standards on one road in one state, and I am evaluating it as such. I support this bill, urge its adoption, and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
I yield such time as he may consume to my colleague from Wisconsin, Mr. Ribble.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Chairman Petri. I also want to thank the ranking member, Mr. Rahal, for working with us as we advanced this bill through committee. It passed our committee with voice vote. The bill is very simple. It's to As Chairman Petri mentioned, it maintains the status quo on a single highway in Wisconsin that's being changed from a U.S. highway to a U.S. interstate. Highway 41 from Green Bay, Wisconsin to Milwaukee is slated to become an interstate next year. And to do that without any disruption to safety, it's important that we grandfather the current weight limits that are currently on the road, and this bill just does exactly that. It ensures that any trucks that drive on the road today will be able to drive on the road after the conversion. And without this bill, shippers would simply have two options, and neither would be good for safety. One option would be to move these trucks onto side roads, which in Wisconsin are often rural or through small towns, not suited for truck traffic. The other option would be to put more trucks on the highway to comply with that, with the lower weight limits. Neither option is good for safety, and neither option is good for Wisconsin. As Chairman Petri mentioned, it's supported by the Wisconsin State Patrol, supported by the Governor of Wisconsin. It's supported by Wisconsin State Assembly, including the majority and ranking members, and it's supported by Wisconsin State Senate, supported by Wisconsin DOT. As the ranking member mentioned, this is not a precedent-setting piece of legislation. In fact, it's happened in other parts of the country. I'm in support of this legislation. I urge my colleagues to support it, and with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I ask the Mr. Chairman of the subcommittee if he has any further speakers. No. I have no more on this side, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time and urge my colleagues to support the legislation before us.
The gentleman yields back his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill, H.R. 2353? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass House Concurrent Resolution 44.
The clerk will report the title of the concurrent resolution.
House Calendar Number 45, House Concurrent Resolution 44, Concurrent Resolution authorizing the use of the Capitol grounds for the District of Columbia Special Olympics Law Enforcement Torch Run.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Ribble, and the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on House Concurrent Resolution 44.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
HCON Resolution 44 would authorize the use of Capitol grounds for the District of Columbia Special Olympics Law Enforcement Torch Run that will be held on September 27, 2013. I would first like to thank Ranking Member Norton of the Subcommittee on Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management for introducing this resolution, as well as Chairman Barletta of the Subcommittee for co-sponsoring it. As in years past, the torch run will be launched from the West Terrace of the U.S. Capitol and continue through the Capitol grounds as part of the journey to the annual D.C. Special Olympics Summer Games. The Special Olympics is an international organization dedicated to enriching the lives of children and adults with disabilities through athletics and competition. The law enforcement torch run began in 1981 when the police chief of Wichita, Kansas saw an urgent need to raise funds for and increase awareness of the Special Olympics. The torch run was then quickly adopted by the International Association of the Chiefs of Police. Today, the torch run is the largest grassroots effort that raises funds and awareness for the Special Olympics program. The event in D.C. is one of many law enforcement torch runs throughout the country and across 40 nations. I support the passage of this resolution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentlewoman from the District of Columbia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
I rise in support of House Concurrent Resolution 44, which authorizes the use of the Capitol grounds for the 28th Annual Law Enforcement Torch Run, which benefits the District of Columbia Special Olympics. The Torch Relay event is a traditional event associated with Summer D.C. Olympics, which took place this past May. Each year, approximately 2,500 Special Olympians compete in over a dozen events here in the nation's capital, and more than 1 million children and adults will, with special needs, participate in Special Olympic programs worldwide. The Law Enforcement Torch Run has become a truly popular event on Capitol Hill and is an integral part of the fundraising efforts for the D.C. Special Olympics. Nearly 1,500 Law Enforcement Torch Run participants are expected to assemble at the West Terrace of the U.S. Capitol building on September 27, 2013 for a 2.3-mile run to Fort McNair that culminates in a picnic and a celebration for all participants. The Special Olympics of D.C. provides year-round sports and fitness training, health screenings, and athletic competition to all children and adults with intellectual disabilities and touches thousands of families in D.C. and the region. Participants are involved in basketball, bowling, golf, soccer, tennis, track and field, volleyball, and many other sports programs that address various levels of ability. Best of all, the different programs offered to Special Olympics athletes are always free of charge and partially supported by the event that we would authorize today. I'm truly pleased to support such a meritorious organization and support passage of this resolution. I ask my colleagues to do the same. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves her time. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
I'm prepared to yield if the gentlelady has no additional speakers and is willing to yield.
I thank the gentleman for his cooperation in bringing this bill, and I'm prepared. I have no further speakers, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back her time. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
I think the gentlelady, this is a terrific event, Mr. Speaker. It's one that every member of Congress should support, and I encourage the adoption of it. I yield my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to House Concurrent Resolution 44? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative.
Speaker, I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass House Resolution 1542.
Does the gentleman call up H.R. 1542?
Yeah, H.R. 1542. I'm sorry, H.R. 1542.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1542, a bill to amend the Homeland Security Act of 2002 to establish weapons of mass destruction, intelligence, and information sharing functions of the Office of Intelligence and Analysis of the Department of Homeland Security, and to require dissemination of information analyzed by the Department to entities with responsibilities relating to Homeland Security and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Meehan, and the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Homeland Security Committee Chairman Michael McCall and former Chairman Peter King, as well as Ranking Member Higgins and Congresswoman Jackie Speer for joining me in introducing this bipartisan legislation. I urge the support for H.R. 1542, the Weapons of Mass Destruction Intelligence and Information Act of 2013. The legislation provides important guidance for disseminating WMD, that's Weapons of Mass Destruction, intelligence information at the Department of Homeland Security. Weapons of mass destruction are considered, for the purposes of this Act, to be chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear weapons. Mr. Speaker, in 2010, the Congress established the Commission on the Prevention of Weapons of Mass Destruction, Proliferation, and Terrorism. The Commission was chaired by former Senators Bob Graham and Jim Talent. A principal but as of yet unfilled recommendation from the Graham-Talent Commission was to assure that critical collaboration take place, collaboration among Homeland Security intelligence assets and other federal, state, and local partners protecting the homeland. It's time for Congress to do its part right now to ensure that the nation is meeting its WMD detection and prevention responsibilities in a meaningful way. Mr. Speaker, when I stood before this body on this bill last year, I had recently returned from the Middle East, and one of the takeaways from the trip was the amount of chemical weapons stockpiled in Syria. I raised concern that during this extraordinary time of insecurity in the region, these weapons could wind up in the hands of al-Qaeda or other terrorists. Since that time, we've tragically learned that Bashar al-Assad has indeed used chemical weapons on his own people. And we have the threat and fear, the concern of those who have expressed a desire in Iran to use weapons of mass destruction to assure that Israel does not exist. Chemical weapons have completely changed the way our military prepares for operations. Just last week, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Martin Dempsey, told the Senate Armed Services Committee that the military is preparing for the possibility of encountering chemical weapons in Syria. The risk of these weapons getting into the hands of terrorists continues to grow, and our military continues to become more vigilant. These risks, the current nature of the threat, makes this legislation all the more relevant. We must be doing more to assure that local and state law enforcement are privy to intelligence that could stop an attack. In fact, the potential for homegrown radicalization has increased, and therefore the need for law enforcement and federal authorities to work together has increased all the more. I think we're all aware of the tragic circumstances of the attack in Boston that occurred all too recently. And although the FBI closed this case on Tamerlan Tsarnaev, a Treasury Enforcement Communication System, or text alert, was placed on him. It should have immediately pinged Homeland Security and Customs Border Patrol. Therefore, when Tamerlan traveled to Russia in January of 2012 and subsequently returned to the U.S. only to set up a jihadist YouTube account, a red flag should have been raised and federal, state, and local officials should have been notified. One of the purposes of this bill is to enhance the communication and collaboration between our federal intelligence assets, particularly those of Homeland Security, and our federal, state, and local partners. Chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear materials can be quite difficult to detect and to prevent. However, the danger they pose is unimaginable. My legislation is with the recommendation from the Commission, and it will ensure sustained Department of Homeland Security commitment to facilitate the partnership across the intelligence community and the first responder community. I urge support for this bill and reserve my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 1542, the WMD Intelligence and Information Sharing Act of 2013, and yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 1542, the WMD Intelligence and Information Sharing Act of 2013. This bill would strengthen information sharing at all levels of government regarding chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear terrorist threats. Since the attacks of September 11, 2001, concerns about an attack on U.S. soil with a weapon of mass destruction or dirty bomb has come into sharp focus. The Director of National Intelligence has stated that the intelligence community remain concerned about the prospect that a terrorist organization or non-state actor could exploit a weapon of mass destruction and, with little or no warning, inflict significant damage to our nation's citizens and economy. The potentially devastating nature of WMD attacks has come into greater focus in recent months. In particular, there is evidence that chemical weapons were used in the Syrian civil war. Worries persist that in the chaos of this war, dangerous chemical agents could fall into the hands of terrorists or other rogue operators. The prospect that biological and nuclear weapons could fall into hands is very concerning. Recognizing that effective information sharing is essential to preventing a WMD attack, H.R. 1542 requires the Department of Homeland Security to support Homeland Security-focused analysis of terrorist actors and their plans to conduct attacks involving chemical, biological, and nuclear materials against the nation. This bill requires DHS to coordinate with other components and the intelligence community and other federal, state, local, and tribal authorities to provide recommendations on information sharing mechanisms. Robust partnerships between DHS and local law enforcement are critical to enhancing situational awareness with respect to terrorism prevention, including prevention of a WMD attack. I'm pleased to support this bipartisan bill and would like to acknowledge that the language under consideration today originated in comprehensive WMD legislation authored by my former committee colleague, Representative Bill Pascrell of New Jersey. While I support this measure, I would hope that this Congress could move forward on more comprehensive WMD prevention legislation in the very near future. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman from Mississippi for his comments, and I also want to recognize, as he does, the great work that was done by Congressman Pascrell on this issue as well here in this House. And when I had the good fortune to begin to do work on the House Homeland Security Committee, it was Congressman Pascrell who was among those who brought this issue to our attention, and the failure or the lack of the ability to see the issues that the Talent Commission had put forward put into place. So I want to thank him for his good work on this issue as well. Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers at this point. And so if the gentleman from Mississippi has no further speakers, I'm certainly prepared to close.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves his time. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers, and I am prepared to close.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I urge passage of H.R. 1542 today. Enactment of this measure will strengthen the partnership between the Department of Homeland Security and our nation's first preventers against one of the most vexing homeland security threats, weapons of mass destruction. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
I thank the gentleman from Mississippi, and Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume, but I want to thank my colleagues for the support for H.R. 1542. This is a vitally important piece of legislation, as has been identified in the earlier comments of the gentleman from Mississippi, and I echo them myself, particularly this concern as we engage in a world in which the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, particularly those which are chemical weapons, in which we do not know where they may have fallen into hands from not only Syria, Libya as well, creates a heightened sense of need and awareness on the part of those in our intelligence committees to do all to assure that there's collaboration on intelligence that they derive in these areas with the partners on the federal, state, and local levels. So I urge the members to support this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to House Resolution 1542?
Mr. Speaker.
House Resolution. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to H.R. 1542? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative.
Mr. Speaker, may I ask for a recorded vote?
Does the gentleman ask for the yeas and nays?
Yes.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until approximately 6:30 p.m. today.